So this is going to be a pretty intimate panel. You guys are going to have a lot of opportunities to ask questions, hear from really distinguished folks working as faculty and graduate research students at Ohio State. So really use this opportunity to ask your questions. Even if you may think it's a strange question, I'm sure someone somewhere is thinking of it. And like I said, this will be recorded, so it'll be good just to ask as many questions as you can think of. You can also put them in the chat if you don't feel comfortable saying them, and I can ask them. But yeah, so we're going to get started. I'm going to introduce you all to Dr. Dana Mctigue. She is just a fabulous researcher in the Department of Neuroscience here at Ohio State University. So I'll pass it over to you. Thank you. Oh, Dr. Mctigue, you're muted.
I'm muted. I was trying to mute my puppy from barking. So thank you for being here today. And we're really, this is really informal. We're just here for you to give you some information and answer any questions you might have. And so I'm gonna have people introduce themselves so you know who you're talking to. So I'm Dana Mctigue. I'm a professor in the Department of Neuroscience. How about Ruth?
Hi, everybody. I'm Ruth Barrientos. I'm in the Department of Psychiatry, but I'm a neuroscientist. I'm a behavioral neuroscientist.
And Leah?
Hi, everyone. I'm Dr. Piter. I'm also in the psychiatry department, but a neuroscientist, and I'm one of the co-directors for the neuroscience graduate program at OSU.
And Katie?
Hi, I'm Katie Lenz. I'm an associate professor actually in the psychology department. I too am a neuroscientist, behavioral neuroscientist by training, just in a different department.
And Chrissy?
Hi, I'm Chrissy Kiggerl. I'm a research scientist in the Department of Neuroscience.
And Unida?
Hi, my name is Unida. I'm a graduate student, a first-year graduate student in the neuroscience graduate program here at OSU.
Nikki?
Hi, I'm Nikki. I'm a fifth-year graduate student in the neuroscience graduate program.
And then Danny.
Hi, I'm Danny. I am a second-year student in the neuroscience graduate program.
Okay, thanks everybody. So you can see we're all neuroscientists. That's how we all know each other. And I'm going to give you some information on our neuroscience graduate program, but I understand or I realize you may not all be interested in neuroscience. So there's lots of different graduate programs, but the information I'm going to give you on our program is pretty similar to what you will find in other programs as well. Okay, so and also after this, I'm going to send to Jack a list of all the graduate programs that are in the Ohio State Health Sciences colleges. So the different graduate programs in College of Medicine and College of Optometry and Vet Medicine, there's a ton of different programs to choose from. And so this list, actually Danny and Nikki helped me put it together, and Danny made it look really great. And so with this list, you can click on the name of any of the programs and it'll take you right to their websites. So if you have, if you want to follow up more on different programs, you can check out on that. Is there one for engineering? There's not one for engineering on our sheet because we just have all the health sciences ones, but there are engineering programs. So we could help you track that down if you need that. And there's also a biomedical engineering graduate program, which I don't know. Danny, is that one on there? I don't remember. I don't think that one's on there.
I don't remember seeing it. I know there was bioinformatics and things like that on there, but I don't quite remember.
Yeah. So I'm sure we could find out. And some of the ones that are not in health sciences might be a little bit different from the health sciences programs. So just keep that in mind. So I'm going to share my screen and show you some slides. And you guys, this is, like I said, really informal. So please feel free, if you have any questions throughout, please feel free to just shout them out. Or if any of the panelists have any comments or suggestions, or I mess anything up or forget something, please feel free to join in as well. Okay, so this is the panel for today. Tanisha, unfortunately, is another graduate student who is in the middle of an experiment, which happens sometimes, and she couldn't join us today. So, okay. So our neuroscience graduate program, which is their website right here, I'm just going to give you a couple of the highlights that comprise our program. So our program is a PhD program. So if you start this program, you'll go through the end, by the end of the program, you'll have your PhD in this. We do have a master's in neuroscience program, and that's a relatively new program. It's only in its second year right now. So if you just wanted to, go that far and then stop, there's that program as well. In our program, the graduate program, you take core classes in year one. And so these core classes would give you in-depth information in neuroscience. So we have, like cell biology and neuroanatomy. understanding how neurons work, understanding what are all the different cells in the brain. We have classes that are involved that focus on like neurobiology of disease. So they'll cover topics like Alzheimer's disease or multiple sclerosis or spinal cord injury. You hear from a researcher and from a clinician who's actually treating patients in that type of disease or that injury model. So the core classes really give you in-depth and breadth novel in neuroscience. And they are all done within the first year. Then after that, you can take electives throughout the rest of your graduate career. It's up to you and your advisor. So we have like a neuroimmunology class, which is an elective that a lot of our students end up taking. And depending on what you focus on for your research, there may be other electives that you would want to take, like a developmental biology elective or something like that. One thing that I think a lot of people don't know is that our students are graduate research associates, and that means they're actually getting paid to go to school. So our students get a stipend to go to school. They don't pay us. So they don't pay tuition and they get paid. And I think, is this right? Are the stipends around 28,000 now, you guys?
They're up to 30.
30,000 now. Okay. So 30,000 a year to get paid to go to graduate school. And this also includes health insurance. So I know that, if you were thinking about you'd have to take out more student loans or, get a job to go to graduate school, that's not the case, at least not for most of the health science programs. So like I said, I don't know about engineering or other programs like that, but almost all of our programs, you get paid a stipend. If you're in the psychology program, which Dr. Lenz is also a faculty in the psychology program, I think they're graduate teaching associates, right, Katie? And then they'll do some research and some teaching, but still get paid. Is that right?
Yeah. Yeah, in psychology, the stipends are a little less, but they're still like a living wage and you get teaching opportunities too. Yep. So PhDs and in most arts and sciences disciplines too, you don't have to pay for it. You'll get your tuition paid and get a stipend so that you don't have to go into further debt.
Yeah, and that's something I didn't know. So actually, I'm a first generation student. So I came from a really tiny town in central Pennsylvania, very rural. No, I didn't even know what graduate school was when I was growing up and when I first went to college. I thought if you liked science, you could be a teacher or you went to med school, and those were the only options. So it wasn't until I got to undergrad and I started talking to other students that I learned that there are all these other options. And when I found out, wow, I get paid to go to grad school, that's amazing, because I had tons of student loans as an undergrad. So it was really great. And this, to sound like an old fart, back in my day, the stipends were much, much lower. So now our students really can have a decent living, especially in Columbus, where the cost of living is fairly good. And a lot of students end up getting houses or, are able to live. And so what our students do most of the time then when they're not taking classes is doing research in their home lab. And the way that works is, I think it's on the next slide. So in the very first year of graduate school, while you're taking your classes, you would also do lab rotations to figure out which lab you want to do your work in. So we have over 50 faculty members in the NGP program, and these 50 faculty members all can take on graduate students. And so what that means is, like, Nikki actually is a graduate student in my lab. So in her first year, she worked in my lab for a rotation, so like a 7-week rotation, and she decided that she liked the research in my lab. She felt like I'd be a good mentor for her, and I decided that she was a good fit for my lab. So like not always, not every student and mentor are going to be like the perfect fit, personality wise, potentially. So we both like, okay, this is a really good fit. I really like Nikki. She had great enthusiasm. And so I said, yes, I have money, I have space, you can join my lab. So she's been in my lab ever since, almost getting ready to defend her thesis. We're actually starting to talk about next summer. She may be finishing up, which is pretty exciting. So in your first year in the program, you could contact faculty members and ask them if you could do a rotation in their lab. You would ask them, do you have space for a graduate student? And could I rotate in your lab? And then you can do up to 4 different rotations in your first year, and then figure out which lab is a good fit for you. So you could try out different labs. So you try a big lab or a small lab. Like every lab is a little bit different. Each lab has a different kind of personality. Some PIs have different managing styles. So some tend to be very much hands-on. They're in the lab themselves all the time, also doing experiments next to you. Some, like me, are more hands-off and let the students kind of do their thing, but I'm always right there available in case they have questions or, to look over data together. So every lab kind of has a different feeling, and you want to make sure that it is a good fit for, your personality, for the size of the lab, for things like that. So once you do the rotations, our students almost always, I think, find a home lab to join. And so then once they join that lab, then they'll stay in that lab for the rest of their time in grad school. And here's some examples of just some of the different research themes that are in our NGP program that different faculty research. It's like my lab does spinal cord injury, there's traumatic brain injury, degeneration, so there's a lot of Alzheimer's researchers, developmental neuroscience, neuro-oncology. So you can see, I don't have to read it to you, but there's a ton of different areas that could be potential home labs for you, depending on what you might be interested in. And this is just in the neuroscience program, right? So the other programs are, there's a biophysics program, there's a molecular, cellular, and developmental biology program. So any kind of different thing, you might think of in science, there's probably, a lab studying that here at OSU in one of our graduate programs. Do you guys have
One
any?
thing I was going to jump in. So I actually did my PhD in the biomedical sciences graduate program. And so if you're interested in biomedical research, but you're not sure exactly, maybe you don't want to commit to neuroscience or, a different sort of specialty, that's a great opportunity to get exposure to a lot of different types of research, because there's faculty from lots of different departments that work with that graduate program as well. So.
Do you guys have any questions? Oh, go ahead, Leah.
I would say one more thing too, just because it was very confusing to me at first, but the reason why they pay you is because you're assisting that professor in their lab with their research. They're not paying you like to go to class, but you get that for free if you help the research.
Yeah, so it's mutually beneficial. So like Nikki is doing research in my laboratory. So I have grants from, I have funding from National Institutes of Health and from some different foundations. And so when I write these grants, I tell NIH, okay, I'm going to do spinal cord injury research, and I'm going to study cellular repair and do these experiments and publish papers, and present data on this. But, I can't do it by myself. I need people in the lab to actually help do the work. And so Nikki is one of these people who, she goes in the lab and she does a lot of the hands-on work. She helps write the papers, she helps present the data. So she'll get to be an author on the papers that come out, which is really good for her career. So as a student, and I think I have that, maybe, I don't know if that's coming up next, but one of the things that you'll need, one of the things that looks good whenever you finish graduate school in our programs is to have published some scientific papers. And so Nikki has already published 2 or 3 papers, I think, and we have some more that we're working on to get ready to be submitted. So you both get something out of it. And she's getting a degree out of it, right? So that's awesome. So going through the program, then again, your second year, you might take electives, you'll do more research, you'll do a candidacy exam. So that's the exam that you actually take to become an official PhD candidate. And the rules for the candidacy exam are in the graduate school handbook if you wanted to look them up. Each program may have a little bit of different spin on it, but it's basically the students write up a proposal based on the research, and then they have a 2-hour-long oral exam where they stand in front of their committee and the committee can ask them questions on anything. But if you have a good mentor, I hope I try to be a good mentor, I try to make sure my students are ready and prepared for the exam, right? No PI wants your students to go in and not do well. So the PIs are really on your side. They want you to succeed. So you have your candidacy exam, and then you'll spend the next you'll spend years 3 to 5, mostly doing research, finishing up your research projects, writing your thesis. At the same time, you'll get to attend scientific meetings, assuming we get to have meetings in person again, that'll be much more fun. But we have scientific meetings that take place in the United States and even internationally. So you'll get to present your work there. You can go and give a poster presentation, or you may be able to give a slide talk to these different meetings. And that's also something that looks really good on your resume to show that you've given talks on your science. You'll publish papers in scientific journals, so you get to be a published author. And then also in our program, and I'm sure a lot of other programs, you can also participate in outreach. So we think it's really important to try to reach out and give back to communities around Columbus that may not have the networks or the resources to understand, what do we do? What do you do as a neuroscience graduate student? What does a neuroscientist really do on a daily basis? So there's different outreach programs to the schools in the area to try to teach the kindergarten through 12th grade students about what we do, so they can kind of learn about it early. What else? Whoops. Oh, we did that one already. Okay, so by the end of the program, you'll be marketable then for a lot of different types of positions. And so many of our graduates go on to do what's called a postdoctoral fellowship. So if their long-term goal is to become an academic faculty member, like a few of us on the panel are, you really can't go from graduate school to becoming a professor. There's a step in between that most people have to go through, and that's a postdoctoral fellowship. And in that, you'll go to a different laboratory, usually at a different institution, but not always. And you'll do basically some more training. And it gives you a chance to get a different kind of training. So we always encourage our students, you want to go learn new skills, maybe learn a different injury model or a different disease model. You may learn different techniques, you'll get to meet different colleagues, and you'll be at a postdoctoral fellowship for a couple years, I don't know, 3 to 5 years, sometimes a little bit longer. And after that, then you would apply to become a faculty member. And the good thing is, as a postdoc, you don't have to take any more classes, you get paid more money. So I think the starting postdoc salary now is around $54,000 or $56,000 a year. So they get paid better, and it's only doing research. So it gives you a chance to focus 100% on research. So it's usually, a lot of times people say that's like one of their favorite times of being a scientist when they were a postdoc, because they got to really just do the fun science that they loved. Some of our students, though, don't want to go on and become academic faculty. So some will go into biotech or pharmaceuticals. So Nikki wants to go into like a biotech type position, so that she's kind of checking out positions like that right now. We have some students that go on to do science writing positions. So another one of my former students is doing that. She's doing writing for science. Some go on to do, let's see, I can't see my slides. Oh, science communications, right? So we have some students now that are really interested in becoming, being able to communicate science to the public. So it's one thing that, like, as faculty, we don't really get to do that much. I don't really get to go out and give talks to the public. I give talks usually to other scientists and other universities. So science communicators are really like a nice liaison between the scientists and the public. They understand the science, and they're really skilled at being able to communicate the science in a way in which the public can understand. And then some might decide they want to go to smaller colleges. So like Ohio State's a large research institution. Some may want to go to smaller colleges like Ohio, what's the one up north? Ohio Wesleyan University. So places like that, the faculty tend to do less research and more teaching. So if you really wanted to do, focus more on teaching, then you would go to a school like that potentially. And if you do that, it's really helpful to get some good teaching experience as a grad student. Let's see. So what we look for in applicants, so if you were thinking about applying to our program or to most of the graduate programs, one of the things that we really look for is research experience. And so we want to make sure that the students coming into graduate school basically know what they're getting into. Because if you don't really have a good feeling for what it's like to be a researcher in the lab, you don't really want to go into a program and commit 5 years to a program and then find out, oh, I really don't like this. I don't like being in the lab every day, all the days, and working with rats or mice or fish or whatever, and looking in microscopes. Like, you may not like it. So research experience as an undergrad is really important. And the way you can do that is just reach out to faculty at OSU. So I get emails probably once a week from the neuroscience undergraduate majors to say, do you have any openings in your lab? Could I come and do some research in your lab with your lab members? And so I almost always have undergrads working in the lab, and that's a way for them to get research experience. This can be kind of a barrier, though, because faculty get so many emails. We get more emails from students than we can usually take. So be persistent, and don't take no as a rejection personally if you can help it. Try to cast a wide net. Maybe try to, in your emails, give some information that might make you stand out. Talk about why you want to do the research, or I don't know, if you have questions about this or reaching out to faculty, you can always email me or anybody on the committee or on the panel, and they could help you kind of, write your emails, or help you maybe try to figure out people that might be willing to have you guys work in the lab. We also look for the students have to submit their grades. So you submit your transcript when you apply to graduate school. So we want students to have good grades, but they don't have to be all A's. We know not everybody gets an A. I certainly didn't have all A's and everything. So you don't have to get all A's and everything. We also like the average GPA we like is around 3.5 or higher, but if it's lower, that's not a deal breaker. So we tend to try to do a holistic approach when we select students. So we don't just look at one thing or the other, we look at the whole package. So these are just like some of the things that we look at. Your letters of recommendation are really important, especially if you get a letter from the lab mentor that you're working in. So you want to have letters that, really support you. So it's good to get to know your lab mentor. If you're an undergrad, I know undergrads in my lab sometimes feel like, I don't want to bother her, she's a PI, she's in her office, I don't want to bug her, but it's okay. You need to get to know the PI. You want them to get to know you and know your motivation and your enthusiasm. I love undergrads. I love having them in the lab. They're usually so enthusiastic and so excited. And so I love talking to them. So don't be afraid to talk to the mentor. And then another thing that's important is for most programs, you have to write a personal statement. And the personal statement is to explain basically why you want to go into that program and why you want to go to that institution. So for here, we look to the students' statements, why are they interested in neuroscience and why Ohio State, So they typically tend to explain a little bit about what they did as an undergrad as far as research goes, and why they're interested in neuroscience. That's about it. It doesn't have to be super long. We get a lot of applications to read, so we don't really want to read something that's 5 pages long, right? Because we may have 100 of these applications to read through. So like 2 pages max would be it. And you could have your research mentor read them. So like I've done that for undergrads in my lab. I'll read their personal statements and kind of help them sculpt them a little bit. And then also for our program, we don't look at GREs. We don't even ask for GRE scores. That's something that I think a lot of programs are getting away from. So no worries about studying for, paying for, and taking GREs. I think, yep, that's all I have for as far as slides go. So I'm going to stop sharing and then open up to you guys to see if you have any questions or any, thoughts, or if anybody else in the panel wants to say anything to fill in what I may have missed. Okay, Eamon, is that how you say it? Where's Eamon?
Yeah, Eamon, yep.
Okay, cool.
Hi, thanks so much for your presentation. So I know one of the directions that you talked about that people in the program kind of pursue is science communicator.
Mm-hmm.
How have you seen that role kind of evolve recently with this whole kind of, especially now, obviously communicating science to the public is super important. How do you see that that specific part of this field evolving in the future as like we become more connected and such? Because that's something that I've been really interested in for a long time, and I think it's very important right now. But I want to know like how specifically you think that it's going to change in the future.
Does anybody on the panel want to tackle that? Sure, I could talk about it a little bit. It's something I think about a lot. So one thing I will say that's been a really interesting shift that's happened fairly recently in science communication is that there used to be this position called a science journalist, where someone would go to school for journalism and then specialize in kind of being able to communicate science. But now it's really become clear that it needs to be the other way around. It needs to be a scientist who specializes in communicating the science, right? So it's interesting because a lot of the people who currently fill these positions for major magazines and like national publications are actually journalists who spend time to try to learn the science, and not so many scientists who are interested in journalism. And that's really shifting. And I think that that's been pushed a lot by different like social media initiatives. There's a really, really active science community on Twitter, which I know sounds super weird. I didn't make a Twitter till I got to grad school because I found out that like there's a bunch of scientists on Twitter. But I think there's been a real push for it to get your formal scientific training and then specialize in being able to communicate that training.
I know, Eamon, we have a student in our program who's really interested in this, and she's attended some different seminars and things, and I could hook you up with her email if you wanted to talk to her more about it. She's talking about being an influencer, right? So she's trying to figure out how she can be an influencer on Instagram and on Twitter. And I do agree, Danny, like it seems weird trying to put these things on social media, but there's so many scientists on there now. And we have an active faculty search right now for more faculty candidates. And the one person we interviewed this week said he saw our job position on my Twitter. Like I tweeted about it and that's how he found it. So it definitely, you know, people are following it. So it seems weird to me, but it's definitely changing that way. But if you want, I'll put her email in the text, and you can email her if you would like to just ask her what she's doing to prepare for this, and tell her that I gave you her name. She's totally great, and she'd love to talk to you, I'm sure.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Yeah.
I think another really interesting direction for scientific communication would be jobs kind of like Dr. Anthony Fauci, who is communicating information about health to the public. And there's, you know, in terms of government and health, I think there's a lot of room for good scientific communication in the public health realm. And advocacy to legislature people on behalf of the scientific community for things like funding and things like that. You have to be able to explain to non-scientists why, you know, giving money to support research is important.
Yeah, definitely. So somebody asked about in the chat, so she's an undergrad interested in biomedical sciences and biomedical devices. So an engineer major interested in biomechanics. Do you guys, so Ruth, you put in there Dr. Asimini, I guess, Kiroti. I'm so bad at
Yeah,
names.
Kiroti. She does really cool stuff with these wearable implants, like in clothing and stuff.
Cool.
Super cool stuff. And yeah, I put her like you can start there at the little website that I put there. You can start there and just kind of, you know, do a little bit more research on her.
I know there are other people too. Do you guys know of anybody else?
I can't remember. There was a graduate student in my program who was doing work with like joint implants. So he, I think he had an engineering degree as an undergraduate, but then came to the Biomedical Sciences graduate program and was working in a lab where they were working on like hip replacement parts, but they were specifically working on like the joint implants. And I can't remember the lab because it's been a long time, but I know that there are opportunities. I don't know specifically like if there's an actual program designed for that, but I think sometimes within some of the larger interdisciplinary programs, there are opportunities to work with labs that specialize more in medical devices or things like that.
Like I know someone who's using like nanoparticles to deliver drugs after injecting them into the brain, but it's not really like a biomechanic. It's just more of a different biomaterial.
Dana, there was that postdoc on the outreach committee that was an engineering major, but then was working on like pulmonary biomechanics too,
That's
right?
Yeah, I could find her name.
But yeah.
If you go to the biomedical engineering website at OSU, there's usually a tab that says research. And basically, if people are doing research, then they might be taking undergrads. So you could kind of look through to see if they're using devices and then just email them.
Yeah, I just wanted to jump in because the next question was, when is the right time, you know, to email any professor about, you know, these opportunities? And the answer is anytime, any day, anytime. I mean, someone emailed me 2 weeks ago and said, I read this very specific paper from your lab, super interested in it. Like they, you know, they had done their homework basically. And at the time I didn't have, you know, really an opening, but in the he was really persistent. I mean, you know, very kind and not pushy, but persistent. And it turned out that literally just you know, a couple days ago, I got notice that one of my grants is going to get funded, and it's exactly on that topic that he was super interested in, right? So it just opened up, and so it was like perfect timing, and you know, it was thanks to his persistence and his, you know, really like deliberate, you know, intentional interest in my work that I was like, yeah, you know, I'd be stupid not to take him. So, you know, just kind of, you know, there isn't a bad time. you know, sometimes the answer might be no, but then just kind of keep going. And, you know, eventually some, you know, maybe a position will open up, or, you know, someone else will leave and open up a, you know, a spot for you. So just be persistent, but not pushy.
You can also ask them, if you're interested in the research, you can also ask them, do you know of anyone, if you don't have an opening, do you know of anyone in this field that might?
And I would say, you know, as far as when to do it as an undergrad, I would say as soon as possible. So I've had freshmen reach out to me to work in my lab. And the good thing about that is if you get into a lab and it works really well, you could work in there for 3 or 4 years. So I had a student, undergrad, joined my lab. She actually was at the end of her freshman year, stayed in my lab until she graduated, and she had her own projects by the end. Like she's on paper. So undergrads don't always get on papers. It depends on like how much you can get done and how long you're in the lab, basically, I guess. But she was independent by the time she was done. So by being in the lab for so long, she really became an expert. But also, if you start early and then you decide, well, I'm in Dana's lab, but I don't really think I love spinal cord injury. I might want to go into like behavioral neuroscience. So maybe you spend some time in my lab, but you still have time left before you graduate. So then you might go say, I want to go ask Dr. Lenz if she has space in her lab and learn something different. So the sooner you start, the more time you have for more opportunities to, you know, learn different fields, learn different areas, meet different people. Because it's okay too as an undergrad if you have a couple different research experiences.
Yeah, I would just add to that I have had many undergraduates tell me like they were apprehensive about asking because they didn't feel like they had any experience. Nobody has any experience. You're an undergraduate researcher. We sort of assume that you don't have experience, and it's our job to give you the experience. Right. So, you know, I mean, if you're interested in, say, neuroscience, I think it's great to have had like an intro neuroscience class. Make sure you actually like neuroscience. But other than that, you know, we're not expecting anybody to know how to do anything that they do. I mean, taking like a lab class isn't the same as working in a lab. So I totally agree with what Dr. Barrientos said. Early and often, most of the undergraduates that are in my lab now were quite persistent. And again, not in like an annoying way, just in like a persistent way. And the answer for many of them was no 3 or 4 times. Like, you seem great, but I just don't have an opening right now. And I usually say, like, feel free to reach out close to the next semester, but just reach out. And it's important to remember what Dr. Mctigue said too, is we get a ton of emails. So don't feel like your email is going to like stand out as like, oh, well, this person is emailing me a million times. Like, we're getting a lot of emails from undergraduates asking the very same thing that you would be asking. So don't feel, I mean, you still probably will feel like a little awkward being like, hey, I'm reaching out again, you know, but it's okay. That's normal. And in fact, you know, that's the way to get into a lab. But also, I think, cast a wide net, be willing to reach out to a number of professors and kind of follow up.
Yeah, it actually kind of looks good. When I tell my students that too, like when they reach out and I don't have a space, I'll say, you know, feel free to reach out to me in the summer, reach out to me next semester because I may have a space then. And if they reach out again, I'm like, oh, they're really genuine. Like, they are really interested in my lab. So that actually makes you stand out in a way, right?
I think another thing I would just mention that Dr. Mctigue mentioned was that if you're in a lab and you're like, actually, this really isn't for me, then, but I think I'm interested in working instead of mice with humans, like, talk to your PI. They're not going to be offended. It's not going to hurt your feeling. That's exactly what you should be doing as an undergrad, figuring out what you like to do. So if you say, you know, I'd really like to work with a human study, do you know anybody that I could move to? No problem whatsoever. Like, that's really good to have some experience for what you're going to do after, rather than staying in a lab that's not really a great fit for you.
Yeah, and then you could even have that, like when you apply to grad school, in your personal statement, you know I want to do human research because I've done animal work and that wasn't for me. And I did do some human studies and I loved it. So it kind of shows that you figured out what you really want to do. Eamon, you have your hand up again?
Yeah, kind of branching off we're talking about with undergraduate research experience. So how does the program, in terms of like admissions and stuff, see applicants that have a lot of like wet lab experience, but haven't been able to be on a paper or become published in that way? So like, I know me personally, I've had experience like over a lot of different summer research experiences, like different REU programs. but haven't, given my busy schedule during the semester, haven't been able to work in a lab, and that's kind of what you need to do to get onto papers, have a long sustained effort on one project.
Right.
So do you look like unfavorably upon people who do research kind of like segmented through different summers, and favor people that are more continuing on one project, or does it just any experience valuable at all?
I think from my experience, it seems like more applicants do not have papers than do. So we don't look unfavorably on that. What do you guys think, Leah, Katie, right? I think that most often you don't end up with a paper. So that's okay.
I think that in lieu of a paper, if you are able to like do a poster at the end of that summer experience, some programs have that built in and have done some, scientific communication officially. That looks really good too.
So how about you, Unita or Danny or Nikki? Did you guys have papers as undergrads?
I didn't have a paper, but I would say that one thing I knew stood out for me when I was applying, there were other students who were on papers. And I think part of the reason that they were on papers, I'm not trying to badmouth anyone, is because they literally did work in towards the project, so they had to be put on the paper. But it stands out if you actually know your research. So you may have done a summer research project, but if you totally understand the reason that you did it, what you did, and the outcomes and the implications, it's more important that you know that than you being on a paper but not fully understanding why you did what you did.
Yeah, that's 100% right.
Yeah, I also didn't have a paper, but just for anyone who isn't familiar, I just want to highlight the summer opportunities. Because I think one barrier to doing research, like say at OSU, like all the positions are not necessarily funded. So if you do a summer program, a lot of the times they'll give you a stipend. So it might be like $3,000 for an 8-week summer program. So I think that's a really good opportunity to get paid for doing the research. And also you're not like taking a summer off from working your part-time job that you might have had over high school. So, and I did a couple of those, and I did one in structural biology. That was the first one I did. And I was like, okay, like this isn't for me, but it was still a good experience. And then the next one I did neuroscience, and I was like, okay, this is definitely more up my alley. So I think that's also a good opportunity to just learn very quickly what your interest might be. It's only 8 weeks. So if you hate it, it's short and you're getting paid. So I would look up those now. Like you're probably going to be in the application window. If you're like a junior, you might be able to apply for this summer. Who knows if they'll be in person, but either way, like hopefully there's some opportunity out there. And you can go to a different university. So it's also a good opportunity to maybe get out of Ohio, see what working at a different university might be like.
Yeah, there's also fellowships and different grants you can write for with your PI. So there are different things that, we can write for our undergrads if they're working here in the summer.
Yeah, I also didn't come in with a paper. I feel like that kind of became a common theme. But what I would like to think stood out in my application, because I guess I don't know for sure, was I actually, in addition to doing research at my university and a summer program that was linked to my research university, I did an internship at a biotech company. And that's kind of where I discovered what I ended up doing, which was electrophysiology. It was a really great experience. It was an unpaid internship. Paid internships are super, super hard to find, even in STEM as an undergrad. And I totally understand that barrier. Like I was a first generation student, been paying all my own bills since I was 16. So like I had a full-time 40-hour-a-week job in undergrad. And sometimes like if an opportunity is there, I do want to press the point that like, if you can really push yourself to make it work, it can really be worth it. Cause like, I'm fairly certain in the back of my mind that like, if I didn't have that outside internship, there's a good chance I wouldn't have gotten into grad school, because my university research was at a super small liberal arts school, really nothing fancy, like really nothing to write home about, and not really related to neuroscience for most of what I did. So if you can find even outside the university any of these opportunities, I recommend doing everything you can to just kind of, push and make it happen for yourself.
It's another good way to get multiple letters of recommendation. If you have different experiences and you ask, would you be willing to write me a letter? Then if you have 2 different summer opportunities, there's 2 potential letters. So that's good to have too.
Yeah, a lot of times students that apply that don't have much research experience, they'll get professors, they'll get teachers from their classes that they may have done well in, they'll get them to write a letter for them. But the letters really can only say, well, I knew her in class, she did well, she got an A or A minus, she answered questions well. Like it's harder for them to really speak to your research abilities, right? So those letters are better than nothing, but they don't really stand out. You really want to see something that relates to research if you want to go into one of these kinds of programs, for sure. So do we scare you off from graduate school? Are you guys all considering potentially going to grad school? I mean, you signed up for this session, so would you be willing to say what areas you're interested in? Anybody in neuroscience?
Yeah,
Yeah?
I'm a major.
Good, that's good. Your undergraduate major, you said, is neuroscience?
Yeah, and I'm like interested in research in that field. So
What year are you?
a first year.
Okay, so you could start reaching out to faculty.
Yeah.
If you wanted to do research in the labs. If you I can put my email in the lab. So if you guys have any questions or want to talk about researchers in neuroscience you're interested in, you could contact me, or anybody on the panel could help you try to identify people you might be interested in their labs.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was looking into it because I have Dr. Boyd right now, and
yeah.
I've been talking about like all the research he's done. So I definitely want to like start applying to a lab soon.
Cool. Anybody else in neuroscience, interested in neuroscience?
Yeah, I'm also currently in neuro.
Okay. What year are you, Sophia?
I'm a second year.
Okay. Have you done any research yet, or have you?
No, I've actually so I came because I was looking for like more advice. I've tried to reach out to a bunch of professors, but like, as you guys said, it's like you have to be so persistent about it. So I was just coming to see if there's like another edge that I can try and get to getting into labs, or if you knew of any people who were potentially looking for people. So yeah.
No, I mean, the pandemic.
Actually,
oh, go ahead, Leah.
I was just gonna say, like, one good way to try to get people is when they're brand new here, because they don't have anyone in their lab. So Dana, if you have new hires in neuroscience, maybe people to reach out to.
Yeah, definitely. You could email me too, Sophia, and I could give you some names of that. But right now it also kind of stinks with the pandemic. So like for a long time, we were told we can't bring any new undergrads in the lab, right? Because we couldn't really train them very easily. So we were allowed to bring back undergrads that they'd been in our lab already, but not anybody new. And now I think that's lifting, but it's still not easy because our labs are not running at full capacity. Our lab is still having to maintain social distancing. So we can only have so many people in the lab at once. So it's just kind of it's unfortunate, the pandemic, how it's affected the undergrad research.
Yeah, that's exactly the problem that I found myself facing with a lot of like the people that I've reached out to.
Yeah.
One thing that I'd like to jump in here to say with regard to that, I think Dr. Mctigue kind of touched on this earlier, and she said, when you reach out to these potential professors, kind of say or do something to make you stand out. I mean, and we don't mean like do a song and dance or anything, but like for me, like with this last student that reached out to me, something that really stood out was, like I said, he had read a specific paper of ours that, and he analyzed it. He gave me his opinion about, this one thing. And it really stood out to me that he had really understood this particular research, and that was impressive. Whereas most of the undergrads that reach out to me are usually just sort of like, hey, I'm looking for a research experience. Do you have any openings? Right. And they're, it's like, nothing specific about my lab, nothing that tells me that they're actually interested in the aging brain or neurodegeneration or, any of the sort of keywords that my research, hits on. And so, just kind of showing an effort in that person's research, goes a long way to show that you're actually interested in that kind of work. And so what I would recommend to all of you is, if you're interested in, let's say, a particular branch of neuroscience or whatever science you're interested in, go to the, for instance, here, the NGP website, where there's a long list of all the PIs that do that, work in that area, and figure out, oh, I'm really interested, figure out which labs sort of draw your attention and go to them and, maybe see a couple papers that might, catch your interest, do some reading, and then write those PIs back with some more specifics on, why you would like to do research in their lab. That would be my approach, because your email needs to stand out across, all these emails that we get on a monthly basis. And so that's one way to do it.
And you don't have to be like, you don't have to have their papers memorized, right? So like as an undergrad, like scientific papers can be challenging to read. I know when I first went to grad school, it took me a while to kind of get used to even reading the lingo, right? So you don't have to feel like you need to understand every single technique they did or every, graph that they're presenting, but at least have an idea like, oh, I like the fact that you're looking at endogenous repair and spinal cord injury, like if someone wrote to me that. So then I would love to follow up on that with you in your lab. So kind of have the general idea, like Ruth said, and definitely like I've had people write to me and be like, dear sir, I'm like, okay, you didn't even look at my picture. Like you didn't even look at my website, like at least make some effort, to show that you know who I am and what I'm doing.
I'd also say if anyone's interested in bioinformatics or something along that lines, there might be more opportunities there because that could be done virtually. So, or even if you're not super interested in it, but you really want to get research experience, that might be a good way in right now. You could maybe attend lab meetings or do some trainings virtually and be paired up with a graduate student. And then you can do all of that on your computer and at least get an idea of what that might lead to. And then if that lab also has wet lab projects, maybe you could transition into that after the pandemic.
Yeah, and Sophia, I was just thinking like my lab does have some projects where we've done some big transcriptomics studies where we have like a lot of data that needs to be analyzed and looked through. So it could be possible to, to email someone and say, do you have any projects even that we could work on virtually, at least to begin with, because students aren't usually asking that, and that could be a way to kind of get started in a lab, or at least get to see, is that PI responsive? Does she get back to me? Is she, is the work interesting? So that might be an opportunity to at least start.
Yeah, I just want to echo that because in my lab, that's actually what our undergrad does right now, is he's working completely on like big data, single cell RNA sequencing kind of projects at home right now. So something that especially in the neuroscience field right now that's really popular, if you've never heard of it, is this thing called single cell RNA sequencing. And if you can teach yourself a little bit about that topic and then email them and be like, hi, I'm learning this kind of informatics for this topic to a PI, if their lab is currently utilizing this technique, I really think that would go a far way. In like, if you've looked at their like recent publications, seen like, oh, they use single cell sequencing or they use some other like bioinformatics form, and you message them specifically about that, that is typically somewhere that there's so much data, a lot of help is needed. Mm-hmm. So I think that's a really, really great idea. I want to just kind of echo that sentiment.
Yeah. How about any other areas you guys are interested in? Any other Go ahead, Eamon.
I'm not a neuroscience major. I'm a biology major, but I've done research, neuroscience research in the past, and so I'm really very interested in it, and I would love to kind of work on that in the future, and then approach it from, like I was mentioning earlier, like the becoming informed, doing my own research, and then also kind of becoming a kind of communicator, a bridge between the science community and the general public. I'm really interested in neurodegenerative disorders and things of that nature. And so I think these are issues that largely affect obviously all communities in the country, but I think there's a bit of a disparity between certain marginalized communities in the country receiving the kind of information that could potentially benefit them. So that's kind of something that I'm passionate about, and why I think that a neuroscience graduate program would kind of be kind of the next step in that, I think.
Yeah, I mean, there's actually a push right now. So I'm on some college committees with some clinicians that are working, doing the vaccines, the COVID vaccines, and a lot of the minority. So we have a couple different Black physicians in our committee, and they are going out to the communities and saying, okay, I got vaccinated. Like, it seems like that community is specifically really afraid of the vaccines, right? So they're really working hard to try to communicate to the public. They're on Twitter all the time, getting a picture taken with the vaccine. They're going out into the community explaining why the vaccine is safe, why they should be getting the vaccine. So it's definitely really needed for sure. And even things like, I saw a seminar a week or two ago that talked about health disparities due to pollution. Like, minority communities tend to live in more polluted areas, and that pollution can then contribute to even Alzheimer's disease and lung problems and things like that. So even like thinking about how other aspects of the environment can affect the long-term health of the community is important, and they need to understand that.
I was going to ask the students, was there anything you heard today that you were surprised by?
Me?
Sure.
Yeah.
Not really. I guess I was surprised to see that there's that the graduate program doesn't use the GRE. I thought that was kind of I mean, just like in general, like all, I guess I have this idea of all school, like to go to college, take the ACT, then med school, MCAT, all that kind of stuff. So it's surprising to see that there's kind of an understanding that the standardized test isn't necessarily the benchmark, and it's kind of more important to see experiences and that kinds of thing. So I was really happy to hear that.
That's recent.
Yeah. Within the last 2 years, I think, 2 or 3 years, maybe. But that's exactly why. So.
Oh, you guys are well informed.
Yeah. But you can feel free to reach out to any of us. I'll send the slides to Jack, and this, the first slide has our name, and so you could look up our names if you wanted to email any of us with any questions whatsoever. We're here for you. We did this today for you guys, and we're here, and we're happy to help now and in the future going forward. So we want to help you guys succeed.
Are you sure? No last minute questions, anybody? This is your chance. Okay.
Do you guys want to talk about other areas you're interested in besides neuroscience, or not really? I'm just curious.
There are no dumb questions.
Oh yeah. When I was an undergrad, like I said, I knew nothing. Like, I really didn't know anything about graduate school. I didn't know really even how to get to med school, how to get to grad school. I really was, I had no role models. I had no, like Danny said, I'm first generation. I'm from my parents didn't go to college. No one in my family had gone to college. So I was pretty naive and had a lot to learn, and look where I am now, right? So here I'm a college professor. I never would have guessed that growing up, that I would end up here. Most people in my town are still back in that little town. It's a little dying coal mining town. It's really sad when I go back to see people.
Well, if there's no other questions, if I could ask actually everyone on the panel, if you don't mind just popcorning around, what is one thing that you wish you knew when you were an undergrad, or is just kind of your best piece of advice for undergrads who are looking to get into this field? I know we've covered so much of this already, but if you just had to boil it down to like your big take home point, or if anyone is willing to share.
Yeah, I guess I can go first. I would definitely say to advocate for yourself. And it feels funny and it feels scary, but like you've said, to advocate for yourself to get into a lab. But even once you're in the lab, then make sure that you're getting what you need out of it. Asking questions if you don't understand something, asking the students, asking the PI if you can meet. It's not an unusual thing to do, but it can feel kind of intimidating. So, really advocate for yourself. That's what I would say.
I can go next. For me, it was not realizing that, like, I thought that I needed to know that I wanted to do, the effects on stress, on learning and memory, like specifically before I even applied, and that nothing could be further from the truth. The biggest thing that you need to remember is that you need to actually connect with the mentor and not worry about the exact research that you're going to do, because in the end, that becomes the most important factor in completing your PhD successfully and happily, is that connection with the lab PI. and of course the other lab members. Yeah.
Yeah, I'll kind of build on actually two half things you said, Ruth. The first is that, yeah, your journey, your academic journey doesn't have to be a straight line. So I think it's great to find out that you don't want to do things, or that, you know, certain things, you know, your experiences you have might inform future things. I was a psychology major, and I did my undergraduate research on social psychology, like attitudes research. And you know, realized doing that I loved research, and I thought that was interesting, but it was not what I wanted to do, that I was really interested in the brain and wanted to study behavior from an animal perspective. So being able to just kind of listen to your gut and know that like you don't have to have it all figured out, which is, you know, I think what Ruth was saying too. And then kind of the other half of that I really had no idea is that in graduate school, it's much more important the program and the faculty member that you're working with, or the quality of the faculty members that you're working with. That's what you're looking for, right? As an undergrad, you think very much like, oh, I want to go to like Harvard, you know, like Harvard sounds the best. I mean, not to say that there aren't a lot of great researchers at Harvard, but I ended up doing both my graduate school and my postdoc at institutions that were like not particularly on my radar. So I did my graduate work at Indiana University. I wasn't like dead set. I'm not from Indiana. I wasn't dead set on going to Indiana, but I was really interested in like hormones and how they influence the brain. And like IU has like an extremely great, you know, collection of faculty that work on that. So that was a great home for me, even though like IU wasn't like my dream school. And the same thing as a postdoc. I worked at a medical center that I probably never would have considered, in a city I never would have considered, because I wanted to work with, you know, one of like the leading experts in the world on the topic that interested me. So it's kind of a shift in thinking, from just thinking about the institution to thinking about the institution and the program and the individual faculty whose work interests you, because that's really what your intellectual home is going to be as a graduate student. I mean, it makes everything a lot harder because you can't just look at like US News and World Report's top 10 neuroscience PhD programs, right? You have to actually work a little harder to figure out like what might be a good fit for you. But at the end of the day, it is that mentoring relationship that's going to kind of make or break your experience. So it's worth it to put in that extra effort.
I would say to, I would say to take advantages of opportunities that are out there. And then if there's something that you're not finding that you really want, to create your own opportunities. So just to build off the science communication things that was brought up, you know, if you want to be a writer, to like start creating a blog, or to make, you know, short little 2-minute videos explaining a scientific concept that you're interested in, or just attending a seminar and you might not think that you're interested in it, but just going and maybe finding a new connection or whatever it might be. Just attend as many things as you feel like you have time for, because you never know what you're going to find. Because you might think like, oh, I definitely want to be a professor, and then you might attend a seminar and learn about this new career path that's really exciting to you. Or even if you go to med school or whatever you decide to do, I feel like there's a lot of opportunities out there, and try not to pigeonhole yourself in one path.
Yeah, actually, that just reminded me, Catherine Madalena, so the student that I put in the chat who wants to go into communications, we just, I saw a workshop that was put on last fall that had to do with improv. It was improving communications, but part of the whole thing was improv, actually doing improv. I'm like, Catherine, you should sign up for this. And so she did that and she loved it. She's like, it was so helpful and it was really interesting and it was really fun, you know, so even off the kind of outside the box thinking can be helpful.
I was just going to say, for me, I think the biggest thing, kind of like Dr. Mctigue said about advocacy, for me, I felt huge imposter syndrome that was like really crippling initially, because I was coming into a lab where everyone knew more than me. They all seemed to know what they were supposed to be doing every day. And grad school can be a little unstructured. And I was super intimidated by my PI. And so I just kind of like huddled down and read papers. So being comfortable knowing that you're not supposed to know everything in the beginning, and that you're right where you're supposed to be, and that if you need help, that you're well within your, you know, it's expected to not know stuff. You just have to be the one to say, hey, I don't get this. And you will eventually look like those other people around you, but they started where you were you know, even in a couple years, you have totally gained so many skills.
I was going to kind of build on that a little bit. I think definitely not being intimidated by faculty. I feel like as an undergrad, I was very intimidated, like, oh, I don't want to go talk to faculty. I don't want to bother faculty because they're busy. And I think that's sort of natural, but I also think that most faculty are here. They love students. They want to help students. They want to work with students. They're mentoring graduate students or undergraduates all the time. So they're used to, you know, meeting with students and talking with students regularly. So definitely don't be afraid to reach out. And what if you are doing undergraduate research or graduate research in someone's lab, definitely your PI is going to be, you know, a huge advocate for you as you're moving forward. So that's an important relationship. And then the other thing is just to have an open mind. I had no interest in neuroscience as an undergrad. I was a microbiology major. When I went to graduate school, I picked my program because I was interested mostly in immunology and how the immune system sort of responded to pathogens. And then I ended up rotating in a neuroimmunology lab because I was doing a project looking at how the immune system responded to trauma instead of pathogens, and I loved it. And I love neuroscience, but it was nothing that I ever considered prior to doing my rotation in that lab. So definitely keep an open mind. It was actually my undergrad research advisor that suggested I rotate in the lab that I ended up staying in for graduate school. And I never would have picked that lab on my own. So sometimes, you know, that your mentors and advisors have good suggestions, and it's good to keep an open mind too. So.
I would add kind of like what Dr. Farienza said and kind of what Nikki said. You definitely don't want to pigeonhole yourself, but also I think it's more important, it's oftentimes most important for you to choose a lab based on your match with the PI, and that'll really take you far.
Yeah, I think as an undergrad, the thing I kind of wish I had realized at the time was how important networking is going to be for you. Networking both with research faculty that you would potentially be interested in, but also networking with people at your university who can support you in other ways. Like one of the jobs I had in undergrad was I worked for our Dean of Students office for a little bit, and I became really close with one of the assistant Dean of Students. And, you know, when they almost tossed me out of school, like she kept me there. So like there's a lot of other resources available for you because science is great to make your life, but there are other aspects of life that are really happening to you all at once in undergrad. And sometimes it is a struggle to like stay in a position where you are in undergrad, right? And obviously that's the first step you got to finish before even getting to grad school. So I think realizing how important it is not only to network with potential faculty, because that is very important, but also to have a support network of other university administrators who can really help you out.
Yeah, even people like Jack, right? So Jack's
I was gonna say that's the perfect segue. Yeah. You all can reach out to the Office of Diversity and Inclusion. We're all here to help you, especially myself and others in the Moral Scholarship Program. But there are a lot of people at this university who are here to help you succeed. But as you know, Ohio State's just big, so sometimes you gotta be the ones to reach out. So yeah, perfect segue. That worked out well. But yeah, sorry, any last comments?
Yeah, I just wanted to jump on that too, just to say that sometimes building that network is important because as also a first generation person or a college grad, I often didn't even know what to ask because I didn't know what I didn't know, right? And so if you have more people around you that you start to feel comfortable with, you know, that are in these, you know, key roles, you feel a little bit more comfortable saying, what am I not asking that I should be asking? Like what, you know, because like I didn't even know what questions to ask because I was that naive or that, you know, ignorant, so to speak, on these issues. You know, and so that's really important to build that network to the point where you can feel comfortable asking those somewhat embarrassing questions.
Yeah, that's a great point. And for, you know, for you all here, but even if anyone's watching this, the worst question is just a question unasked. And I definitely don't know everything. That's why I reached out to this incredible panel of folks to get some more answers for you all. But, you know, if you connect with me and others in the department, we can get you connected. So thank you all for being here and taking the time to have a great discussion on all sides here. I will be following up with the presentation, the other resources, and the recording of this. And as always, you can reach out to myself, or I'm assuming, you know, folks on this panel, if you all are open to it, I'm reaching out to them to connect with them as well. But yeah, thank you all for your time. And Dr. Mctigue, do you have anything else that you want to say?
No, I just reiterate, you know, we're here for you guys. So feel free to reach out if you have any questions, you want advice, you want to talk to the students about what life is really like as a graduate student. You know, they're living it right now. So yeah, just we're here for you, and best of luck with you guys. All right.
Thanks all. Thank you
Yep.
all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.